5 bugs in your brain that keep you miserable. Let's pause for a moment and ask a deceptively simple question. If you had the chance to see exactly where your mind trips you up day after day, would you dare to look? You are not alone. Every person on this planet lives, loves, and makes choices with what feels like a full deck, convinced their decisions are balanced and their vision is clear. And yet, the very fact that you are here means you are ready to admit one deeply honest truth. Even the wisest brain carries errors in its code. These bugs in your thinking are not shameful, nor are they proof of weakness. They are simply the product of a lifetime of experience, habits, culture, and invisible scripts written long before you knew to look for them. In this book, we are not going to chase perfection or build an image of the ideal mind. Instead, we are set for something much more powerful. Together, we will shine a light on the hidden corners of your thinking, calmly and without judgment. Side by side, that you and I will uncover the 5 most stubborn bugs that quietly sabotage your well-being, crowding your decisions and shaping your worldview day after day. You will not find empty optimism or hollow pep talks here. What you will discover are real, practical steps, techniques used by psychologists, neuroscientists, and thoughtful people everywhere to finally notice where your thinking has been running on autopilot. This journey is both a challenge and a comfort. You deserve to understand yourself with clarity and compassion, whatever your age, and you have every right to demand a mind that truly works for you. If you have ever caught yourself repeating old mistakes, wondering why you feel stuck, struggling to find motivation, or doubting your judgment even after years of experience, then you are exactly where you need to be right now. I promise you one thing. The changes you seek do not require superhuman effort, endless struggle, or magic. They only ask for honesty, for your willingness to see the unseen, and for a gentle commitment to test these ideas in the life you already live. Every chapter will invite you to pause, reflect, challenge your patterns, and do something tangible. Not tomorrow, not someday, but today. This is not a quick fix or a miracle formula. This is a guided conversation, a sincere partnership, and perhaps even a small revolution in the way you see yourself. Are you ready to begin? Then let us start by noticing the first bug together and see how it quietly influences your next thought. Chapter 1. Bias Blind Spot. Pause for a few seconds and consider this. Do you truly believe your thoughts are fair, balanced, and purely objective? It's a comforting illusion that sits at the heart of almost every human being, nearly every one of us. Whether we are working in high-pressure environments, raising a family, making significant financial decisions, or simply trying to understand the news, carries a quiet confidence that we see things as they really are, and that our opinions are formed with cool reason and careful judgment. But here is the first uncomfortable truth that will set the stage for everything we explore together. What you call objectivity is often a carefully constructed story, edited and filtered by invisible habits that protect your sense of self and shield you from the discomfort of being wrong. This isn't a flaw unique to you, nor is it a sign of weakness or low intelligence. Decades of rigorous research in cognitive psychology have shown that we all have what scientists call a blind spot in our thinking. This blind spot is not just a gap in what you notice. It's a sophisticated shield that blocks out any hint that you might be biased, even when concrete evidence sits right in front of you, demanding to be seen. Your mind, remarkably clever and protective, loves to imagine that bias is something other people suffer from. Reporters who twist the facts, politicians who serve special interests, co-workers who can't see reason. neighbors with strange beliefs, even spouses who just won't listen, while you yourself remain logical, fair-minded, and unaffected. This quiet confidence is the bug we're examining today, and it may be the most dangerous of all because it hides so perfectly. The bias blind spot operates like a psychological immune system gone wrong. Just as your body fights off germs to protect itself, your mind fights off information that threatens your worldview. When someone disagrees with you, your brain doesn't immediately consider that they might have a valid point. Instead, it launches a defense. You find reasons why they are mistaken, biased, uninformed, or simply unwilling to see the truth. This isn't conscious deception. It's an automatic process, so deeply wired into human nature that you barely notice it happening. And here is where the trap closes. Once you've decided that you are objective and others are not, you stop looking for your own blind spots. You've solved the problem in your mind, even though the real problem remains untouched. Consider a real American case that gained national attention and reveals this bug with striking clarity. The Central Park 5 case from 1989 involved 5 teenagers accused of a brutal crime they did not commit. Detectives were absolutely convinced they had the right suspects, and this certainty shaped everything they did. They interpreted ambiguous evidence as confirmation of guilt. They ignored contradictions. They even dismissed exonerating clues that didn't fit their narrative. Decades later, DNA evidence proved their investigation had been deeply, catastrophically wrong. But here's the heartbreaking part. At the time, the detectives genuinely believed they were doing their job correctly, seeing the truth clearly, following the evidence impartially. They could not see their own bias because they were certain they didn't have one. This is bias blind spot in its most consequential form. It doesn't just damage decisions. It destroys lives. Imagine a courtroom in the United States where a serious crime has been committed and the stakes are incredibly high. 12 jurors are carefully selected for their supposed impartiality, each swearing they will weigh the evidence fairly and set aside their personal biases. They are told repeatedly that their duty is to remain objective, to consider only the facts, and to ignore their emotions. But study after study conducted by leading researchers shows that even the most sincere and conscientious jurors are subtly swayed by their own beliefs and values, their life experiences, their fears, and their hopes. A juror who has been a victim of crime may unconsciously reinforce perspectives favoring the prosecution. A juror who has struggled with poverty may interpret the defendant's circumstances through a lens of empathy that contradicts the intended narrative. Each person filters the exact same evidence through countless personal lenses: race, gender, age, background, past wounds, religious beliefs, and social values. And each person walks out of that courtroom convinced they made an objective decision. This is the bias blind spot in action, a silent and stubborn bug in our mental operating system. It plays out exactly the same way in your home, at your workplace, and in your social life. Though the stakes feel more personal because they are. Perhaps you've sat through a heated discussion with someone you care about, convinced that everyone else in the room is being stubbornly prejudiced or simply refusing to listen to reason. While you see things clearly and your perspective is rooted in facts. Or you've watched a news story that contradicted your existing beliefs and felt yourself bristle at what seemed like an obvious slant or agenda. Convinced that your own analysis is flawless, while the media outlet just can't stay objective. You've observed colleagues making what seem like obviously poor decisions, and you've judged them as lacking intelligence or insight, never considering that they may have access to information you don't, or maybe weighing values differently than you would. Each person you encounter filters reality through countless personal lenses, And yet, here is the remarkable paradox. Nearly every person thinks their own bias belongs to someone else, exists somewhere outside themselves, and poses no threat to their judgment. Think about the film 12 Angry Men, that classic American drama where one juror challenges the group's rush to convict. What makes that film so powerful and so relevant today is that it shows exactly how hard it is to break through bias blind spot. The other jurors aren't stupid or malicious. They are ordinary people convinced they are seeing clearly. One by one, as the lone dissenter asks questions and forces them to re-examine their assumptions, they finally begin to see what they were refusing to notice before. But notice how difficult that process is. Most people watching that film feel comfort in the happy ending, never quite recognizing that in real life, the lone voice is often drowned out, and the bias wins. Now let's be honest about something that might be uncomfortable to hear. The bias blind spot is slowly poisoning your life in ways you don't fully recognize. It's not obvious, and that's precisely what makes it so damaging. Think about your closest relationships, perhaps a marriage, a long-term partnership, or a deep friendship that has lasted years or even decades. If there is tension in that relationship, if you often find yourself frustrated, misunderstood, or hurt, the bias blind spot is almost certainly playing a role. Here is what happens. Your partner says something that triggers you, and your immediate response is to defend yourself, to explain why they are wrong about you. You cannot see that you might have contributed to the tension. You cannot hear what they are actually trying to tell you. You interpret their concern as criticism and their feedback as an attack. Meanwhile, they feel unheard, unseen, and increasingly alone, even though you are right there next to them. Both of you are suffering, and neither of you can see why. Because you are both convinced that the problem is the other person's inability to understand. This is the silent destruction that bias blind spot creates. After months or years of this, relationships wither. People who once loved each other become strangers, not because they stopped caring, but because neither person could see their own role in the hurt, or consider your career. You have worked hard, accumulated experience, perhaps held several positions over decades. And yet, you feel stuck. You watch colleagues get promoted or move into roles you wanted, and you believe it's unfair that they had better connections or got lucky. But here is the difficult truth. If you cannot see your own blindness, you cannot grow. When your manager offers feedback, you hear it as criticism rather than information. When a project doesn't go as planned, you blame circumstances or other people rather than examining your own decisions. Year after year, you repeat the same patterns because you genuinely cannot perceive them. Your boss notices your resistance to feedback, your defensiveness, your unwillingness to adapt. And this becomes your reputation. The bias blind spot locks you in place, and you experience this as being trapped, as the world being unfair to you, when in fact, you are the one holding the lock. And then there is the deeper, quieter pain. You look around at your life, your relationships, your accomplishments, your daily experience, and you feel a persistent dissatisfaction. You tell yourself that people just don't understand you, that life is harder for you than for others, that if only circumstances were different, you would be happy. But the truth is more nuanced and more hopeful. If you cannot see your own patterns, you cannot change them. The bias blind spot creates a prison where you are both the prisoner and the warden, and you don't even realize the door is unlocked. Here is what happens inside your brain when this bug takes hold. Your mind is designed to protect you, to keep you safe, to preserve your sense of self. When evidence arrives that contradicts your self-image, evidence that you made a mistake, that you hurt someone, that you don't understand something. Your brain triggers a defense mechanism. This is not weakness. This is neurobiology. Your brain releases stress chemicals, your amygdala activates, and you enter what researchers call a defensive state. In this state, you cannot think clearly. You cannot learn. You cannot connect. You are in survival mode, protecting your identity at all costs. And because you are so good at protecting yourself, you never even realize it's happening. You think you are being rational and objective, when in fact you are being defensive and self-protective. So what can you actually do about this? How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? The first step is acceptance. You must genuinely accept, not intellectually, but in your bones, that you have blind spots, that your perspective is limited, that you are not objective. This sounds simple, but it is profoundly difficult because it contradicts everything your mind is trying to do, which is convince you that you are right and others are wrong. But here is the power in acceptance. The moment you admit that you might be wrong, you crack open the possibility of learning. You create space for growth. You stop defending and start discovering. The second step is systematic curiosity. When someone gives you feedback, especially feedback that triggers defensiveness, pause. Literally pause before you respond. Take a breath. And then ask yourself, what if they are right? Not are they right, but what if they are right? This shifts your brain from defense mode into exploration mode. You are no longer fighting, you are investigating. You might say to the person, help me understand what you saw. I want to know. This single shift, from defending to understanding, can transform relationships, careers, and your entire life. The third step is to seek out people who will tell you the truth. This is harder than it sounds because many people around you have learned that telling you uncomfortable truths results in defensiveness, so they stop trying. Find people who care enough about you to risk your anger or hurt feelings to help you see yourself more clearly. These are rare and precious people. Listen to them, even when, especially when, what they say stings. The fourth step is to create a practice of reflection. Find a quiet moment each day, perhaps in the morning with your coffee or in the evening before bed, and ask yourself, where did I defend today instead of listening? Where did I assume I knew better? Where did I dismiss someone's perspective without truly considering it? Write these moments down. Don't judge yourself for them. Simply notice them. This is how you begin to see your own patterns. Here is a practical invitation you can begin today. Find a quiet moment in your day, perhaps early morning or late evening when your mind is calm, and think back carefully to your last significant disagreement or misunderstanding. This could have been at work, with family, or among friends. It might have been a conflict that still bothers you or one you thought you'd resolved. Now ask yourself, with genuine honesty, what did I refuse to consider in that moment? What evidence or perspective did I reject? Simply because it challenged my point of view or threatened something I believe about myself? Write these moments down if you can, being as specific and truthful as possible. What story was I telling myself about why I was right? What would have happened if I had been willing to be wrong, even a little bit? This exercise is not about blaming yourself or drowning in guilt. That's not the goal. Rather, it's about starting a new habit, a skill that will serve you for the rest of your life. The skill of noticing where your mind loves to protect itself from discomfort, where you defend rather than listen, where you judge rather than understand. Each time you catch yourself in the bias blind spot, you are not failing. You are succeeding at something far more important than being right. You are choosing to see yourself clearly, and that clarity is the foundation of real change. The reality is both humbling and hopeful. The bias blind spot is universal, running quietly through every culture on Earth, every class of society, every age group and educational background. A CEO and a janitor both experience it. A scholar and someone who has never finished high school both experience it. People who pride themselves on their open-mindedness and people who are openly skeptical both experience it. By learning to notice this bug, by becoming comfortable with the mild discomfort of admitting you might be wrong, you unlock a door to genuine wisdom and compassion that most people never open. If you can see your own bias, even for a moment, even imperfectly, you can forgive it, learn from it, and begin to grow in ways you never imagined possible. The first bug is always the hardest to find because it's so good at hiding, so perfectly disguised as truth and objectivity. But here is the encouraging truth. Each time you notice it, you chip away at the walls that keep you isolated and stuck in repetitive patterns. Each time you pause and ask, might I be missing something? Instead of assuming you have the full picture, you are rewiring your brain for wisdom and connection. So take this challenge seriously, not as punishment, but as a gift to yourself. For the next day or two, pause before reacting strongly to something, especially when you feel absolutely certain you are right. Ask yourself in that moment, is it possible I'm missing something? Am I seeing only what fits my story? Am I dismissing someone else's truth because it's different from mine? Every honest answer is a victory, a small step toward becoming the person you actually want to be. Are you ready to move forward? Because the second bug we're about to explore is even more seductive than this one, and it hides behind a mask of confidence and certainty that feels remarkably like wisdom. You might be surprised how quickly it appears when you give yourself permission to see the first one. Chapter 2. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. Pause for a moment and think about someone you know, perhaps a colleague, a family member, or an acquaintance, who seems remarkably confident in their opinions, their abilities, their understanding of the world. They speak with certainty about topics they have just started learning. They give advice on matters they have limited experience with. They seem utterly unaware of how little they actually know. Now here is the uncomfortable part. We all do this. We all possess this second cognitive bug that quietly distorts how we measure ourselves. And it operates in nearly the opposite direction from the first blind spot. Where bias blind spot makes us unable to see our own faults, the Dunning-Kruger effect makes us unable to see our own limitations, especially when we are just beginning to learn something new. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a psychological phenomenon discovered by researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999. What they found was both amusing and troubling. People with the least amount of knowledge or skill in a particular area tend to rate themselves as highly competent, while people who are genuinely expert often underestimate their own abilities. It sounds backwards, and it is. But here is why it happens. When you are just beginning to learn something, a new skill, a new subject, a new field, you don't yet know enough to recognize what you don't know. Your brain sees the surface of the knowledge landscape and mistakes it for the entire terrain. You learn a few concepts, practice a few times, and your brain celebrates. Look how much you know. You feel confident because you have not yet encountered the vastness of what remains unknown. Meanwhile, someone who has spent years mastering a field knows intimately how much complexity exists, how many nuances and exceptions and special cases they still encounter regularly. They know how easy it is to make mistakes, how much can go wrong, how much they still have to learn. So they speak more cautiously, more carefully, more aware of their own limitations. Consider a person who has just taken a weekend course in investing or real estate or nutrition. They come back from that course full of enthusiasm and certainty. They tell their friends, their family, their colleagues exactly what they should do with their money, their health, their lives. They speak with the confidence of someone who has discovered a great truth, an actual expert in that field, someone who has studied for years, made countless mistakes, learned from failures, would express the same information far more carefully, hedging their statements, acknowledging exceptions and complexities. The weekend course graduate has not yet learned enough to recognize how much they don't know. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect in its most visible form. And if you are honest with yourself, you can probably identify moments in your own life when you have been that person. Think about the film Good Will Hunting. The main character has natural talent and raw intelligence, but he is arrogant about what he does not understand. He is quick to dismiss the professor, quick to think he has figured everything out, confident in ways that are both impressive and dangerously naive. It takes a therapist, someone genuinely wise, genuinely experienced, to help him see that his intelligence alone is not wisdom, and that his confidence in areas where he lacks experience is actually a form of blindness. The film shows exactly what happens when Dunning-Kruger effect meets life. The arrogant character makes mistakes, hurts people, and only begins to grow when he learns to recognize what he doesn't know. When the therapist confronts him about his defensive arrogance, the character must face the fact that being smart is not the same as being wise, and that true growth requires humility before it requires confidence. In the workplace, the Dunning-Kruger effect creates predictable patterns that you have probably witnessed or experienced yourself. A new hire arrives with confidence and enthusiasm. They have studied the industry, read the books, taken the courses. They see inefficiencies in how things are done. They have ideas for improvement. They speak up in meetings with certainty and passion. They might even be frustrated that their brilliant suggestions are not immediately implemented, but they have not yet encountered the reasons why things are done the way they are done. The history, the constraints, the previous attempts that failed, the politics, the hidden dependencies, the relationships between departments, the client preferences that were hard-won over years. The experienced people in that workplace know all of this, and they know how many bright ideas have crashed against these realities. So they listen to the new hire's suggestions politely, but with a kind of patient understanding that the new hire cannot yet perceive. The new hire interprets this patience as agreement or encouragement, not realizing they are being gently educated. After a few months or a year, if they are willing to learn, the new hire begins to understand the landscape they have entered, and their confidence becomes more grounded in actual competence. Sometimes they laugh at how naive their earlier suggestions were. Sometimes they feel embarrassed. But if they have learned well, they also feel grateful for the lessons. In your personal life, this bug shows up constantly and in ways that can genuinely harm your relationships and your sense of self. You have had some experience with relationships, so you feel confident giving relationship advice to friends. Your friend is struggling in their marriage, and you know exactly what they should do because you have been through similar situations. You give that advice with certainty, but you have not lived your friend's marriage. You don't know all the factors at play. You don't understand the full complexity of their situation. You have had some experience with relationships, but you have not had their experience with their specific partner, their specific history, their specific challenges. An expert in relationships, a therapist, a marriage counselor, someone who has studied human connection for decades. would listen carefully before offering any suggestions. They would ask questions. They would acknowledge how much they need to understand about this specific situation before offering guidance. You have had some experience, so you offer solutions. Your friend takes your advice and it goes wrong, or it doesn't address the real problem, or it makes things worse. Now they feel betrayed, not just by their marriage, but by you, because you were so confident about something you didn't actually understand. You have had some children, so you know exactly what others should do with theirs. You have worked several jobs, so you understand the job market completely. You have lived through some hardship, so you feel equipped to guide others through theirs. But here is the truth that only reveals itself through deep experience and genuine reflection. The deeper you go into any of these areas, the more you realize how much you don't know, how many individual factors matter, how much context and nuance exists beyond your personal experience. Real wisdom, the kind that comes from genuine experience and humility, is quieter, more careful, more aware of its own limitations. This bug becomes particularly powerful and destructive because confidence feels like competence. When you feel certain, your brain is sending signals that feel like the truth. Your thoughts come quickly, your opinions feel well-founded, your recommendations seem obvious and right. You cannot easily tell the difference between actual knowledge and the feeling of knowing. A person who has studied medicine for 8 years and completed residency and has treated thousands of patients has genuine knowledge of medicine. But a person who has taken an online course in nutrition and read a few popular books about health has the feeling of knowing without the actual knowledge. Both feel confident. Both have that sensation of certainty. But the consequences of acting on their recommendations are very different. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is particularly tricky because you cannot simply eliminate it through willpower or good intentions. A person caught in this bug cannot easily see that they are caught in it. If you asked someone in the grip of strong Dunning-Kruger effect about their own competence, they would sincerely defend their assessment. They would give you examples of their knowledge. They would explain why their perspective is well-founded. They would not recognize how much they don't know because they don't know it. This is what makes it such an insidious cognitive trap. The very thing that would help you escape awareness of your own limitations is the thing that the bug prevents you from having. Why does this bug make you miserable? The Dunning-Kruger effect creates a particular collision course between your confidence and reality always wins, though often at great cost. Because it is one thing to fail. Everyone fails. But it is quite another thing to be shocked and bewildered by failure, to not understand why things went wrong, to feel like the world is treating you unfairly when actually you were not as prepared as you thought you were. Imagine you are in a career where you have acquired some knowledge and some experience. Perhaps you have been in your field for 5 or 10 years. You feel confident. Perhaps you overestimate how much you know compared to your peers. Perhaps you take on a project or a responsibility that exceeds your actual competence. You are certain you can handle it. You are certain you understand the landscape. You have not spent time with true experts in this field, so you don't realize how much deeper the knowledge goes. And then something goes wrong. The project fails, the outcome is not what you expected, people are disappointed. Clients are upset. Your boss is concerned. Your confidence, which felt so real, collides with the actual limits of your knowledge. And now you face a choice. You can blame others, blame circumstances, blame bad luck, defend your confidence. Or you can recognize that you did not know as much as you thought you did. If you choose the first path, you will repeat this pattern. You will keep running into the same wall, And each time you will be shocked, hurt, confused. Your career stagnates. Your reputation suffers. People stop trusting your judgment. They stop giving you opportunities. They stop promoting you. All because you could not recognize the gap between what you knew and what you needed to know. You become the person everyone works around, the person whose ideas are politely acknowledged and then ignored. In relationships, this bug is equally destructive and often more painful. You give advice to a friend or a family member from a place of confidence, not recognizing how much you don't understand about their situation. Your advice sounds logical to you, but it fails to account for factors unique to their life. Their specific history, their specific fears, their specific values, their specific constraints. They follow your guidance because you sounded so certain, and it goes wrong. They feel betrayed, not because you meant harm, but because you were confident about something you didn't actually understand. Or you make decisions in your own relationships based on what you think you know about human nature, about love, about communication. You are certain about the right course of action. But relationships are complex, and your certainty leads you down paths that damage connection rather than strengthen it. You speak harshly to your partner because you are certain you are right about something that actually requires more understanding. You push your adult child away because you are confident your advice is what they need, not recognizing that what they actually need is support for their own decision-making process. You take a stand in a friendship over something you are sure about, only to discover years later that you misunderstood, that you were wrong, that your certainty cost you a relationship you valued. You look back years later and realize how much you didn't understand at the time, how confidently you acted on incomplete knowledge. The Dunning-Kruger Effect also creates a particular kind of suffering. The suffering of repeated failure that you cannot learn from. If you recognize that you failed because you didn't know something, you can learn. You can study more, seek guidance, practice deliberately, humble yourself before genuine experts. But if you are convinced that you do know, then you interpret failure as bad luck, bad timing, or other people's incompetence, or people just not understanding your vision, or the market not being ready for your ideas. You don't learn. You don't adapt. You just keep running into the same walls. And each collision is bewildering, painful, and seemingly inexplicable. After the 10th time failing at the same type of project or relationship pattern, you might start to wonder if you are unlucky, or if the world is against you, or if you are just not meant to succeed in this area. You don't realize that you keep failing because you don't know what you think you know. Perhaps most painfully, this bug can destroy your credibility and your relationships with people who might otherwise respect you and want to help you. When people notice that you are confident beyond your actual competence, they lose trust. They see you as arrogant, as a know-it-all, as someone who won't listen to feedback or consider other perspectives. Even if you are intelligent and well-meaning, your overconfidence creates distance. People become less willing to be honest with you, less willing to help you, less willing to follow your lead or support your endeavors. You may not understand why you have become isolated, why people seem dismissive or cold, why opportunities dry up. You may attribute it to them not appreciating you, to jealousy, to the world being unfair, when in fact they are protecting themselves from your false certainty. They have learned through experience that your confidence is not backed by actual competence, and they are making the rational choice to seek guidance elsewhere. So what to do about it? The first step is to actively, consciously seek out the edges of your knowledge. In any area where you feel confident, your career, your hobbies, your understanding of how the world works, your ability to advise others. Deliberately look for what you don't know. Read advanced books, not introductory ones. Take classes from true experts, not from popular educators who simplify. Seek out people who are far more skilled than you in that area. If you think you are a competent golfer, spend time with professional golfers and really notice the gap between what you can do and what they can do. Watch how they think about the game, how they prepare, how they handle pressure. If you think you understand business, spend time with entrepreneurs who have built multi-million-dollar companies from nothing and listen carefully to how they talk about complexity and risk and uncertainty. You will hear far more hedging, far more acknowledgement of what they don't know, far more discussion of failures and lessons learned. If you believe you are good at parenting, spend time with family therapists and child development experts and notice how much deeper their understanding goes. They know things about child development that would take you years of experience to discover. They have studied the research. They have worked with thousands of families. Their knowledge is grounded in evidence and experience far beyond what you can access through your own parenting. The second step is to ask questions instead of making statements. This is profoundly difficult for people caught in the Dunning-Kruger Effect, because confidence naturally expresses itself as certainty and recommendation. But start practicing this shift with deliberate intention. When you find yourself about to say, "You should do this," or "The best way to handle that is," pause, take a breath, and instead ask, "I'm curious, have you considered this?" Or, "What have you already tried?" Or, "What does the research say about this?" Or, "How did that work out for you?" Questions are not weakness. Questions are not a sign that you don't know. Questions are how genuine learning happens and how genuine connection deepens. When you ask real questions with genuine curiosity, you signal to others that you recognize your own limitations, and they respond by being more open, more honest, more willing to teach you, more willing to have a real conversation instead of listening to a lecture. The third step is to seek feedback aggressively and actually believe it, even when it stings. The Dunning-Kruger Effect makes you resistant to feedback because you are confident you already know, because you think the person giving feedback doesn't understand or doesn't have your experience. But if you can override that impulse and genuinely listen to how others perceive your competence, you get invaluable information about the gap between how you see yourself and how others see you. Ask your manager directly, "Where do you see me overstepping my knowledge? Where do I speak with certainty about things I don't fully understand?" Ask your friends, "Is there an area where I give advice with more confidence than my actual expertise warrants?" Ask your family, "When have you noticed me being certain about something I later turned out to be wrong about?" Listen without defending. Don't explain why they are wrong. Don't list all the times you have been right. Take notes. Thank them genuinely. This is gold. This is the information that can actually change your trajectory. The fourth step is to cultivate intellectual humility as a genuine practice, not just as something you do when you are feeling humble. This means genuinely accepting that expertise is deeper and broader than you can perceive from your current vantage point. It means being willing to say, "I don't know," more often than feels comfortable. It means building time into your life for ongoing learning, not as a box to check or a credential to collect, but as a genuine practice of recognizing how much remains unknown to you. Read widely outside your area of expertise. Learn from people different from yourself, different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures, different professions. Travel. Expose yourself to perspectives that challenge your current understanding. Ask experts to teach you. Find mentors who are genuinely more skilled than you and let them stretch you. Each of these is a way of saying to your brain, the world is more complex than I thought, and that's okay. I can be confident in what I actually know while remaining humble about the vastness of what I don't know. The fifth step is to create deliberate practices of competence assessment. Ask yourself regularly, in this area where I feel confident, what evidence do I have of my actual competence? Not how confident I feel, but what can I actually do? What have I actually accomplished that reflects genuine skill? Where have I failed? Someone who has genuinely mastered a skill can not only do it, they can teach it. They can explain why they do it the way they do. They can handle edge cases and exceptions. They can adapt when circumstances change. They can acknowledge what they don't know, even in their area of expertise. So test yourself against these standards. Be honest about the results. If you cannot teach it to someone else, then you don't know it as well as you think you do. If you panic when circumstances change, then your mastery is more fragile than you believed. Here is your challenge for today. Pick one area where you feel confident, something in your career, your hobbies, your knowledge of how things work, your ability to advise others, your understanding of a particular topic. Now find an expert in that area. Someone significantly more skilled or knowledgeable than you. Someone who has studied this field for decades or practiced it for years. Spend time with them. Listen carefully to how they talk about the field. Notice what they know that you don't. Notice how they acknowledge complexity and uncertainty even in areas where you feel confident and certain. Notice how they ask questions instead of giving answers. This single exercise, done with genuine openness, can shift your relationship to knowledge for the rest of your life. And if the expert you find is humble, if they seem uncertain even in their area of mastery, that is actually the sign of true expertise. That is what genuine knowledge looks like. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is not something you overcome once and then never encounter again. It is not a bug you fix permanently and move on from. Rather, it is a pattern your mind naturally falls into whenever you encounter new areas of learning or new challenges. Every time you move into a new job, a new field, a new skill, the Dunning-Kruger effect resets. You are a beginner again, and you will feel the pull of false confidence again. So you have to keep returning to practices of humility, curiosity, and genuine assessment of your actual competence. But here is the beautiful part. The more you do this, the more you will find that real confidence, confidence grounded in actual skill and knowledge, is far more powerful than false confidence. Real confidence is steady. It is not threatened by feedback. It is not damaged by mistakes. It actually welcomes challenges because it trusts itself. People trust genuine competence. They follow genuine expertise. They learn from genuine wisdom. They want to work with people who are confident in what they know and humble about what they don't. And all of that comes from the willingness to see clearly where you actually are, rather than where you wish you were. Now we move toward the third bug, one that feels more deceptive because it comes disguised as something that makes logical sense. It is the pattern that keeps you holding on to the wrong things long after you should have let them go, the sunk cost fallacy. And it may be hitting closer to home than you realize. Chapter 3. The Sunk Cost Fallacy. You are standing at a crossroads, and you have been standing there for far longer than you should have. Behind you lies a path you have walked for years, or perhaps months, or perhaps just weeks. You have invested time on this path. Money, energy, emotional resources, hopes, and dreams. The path is not leading where you wanted to go. You can see that now, though part of you still refuses to fully acknowledge it. Ahead of you lies a different path, one you have not traveled, one that is uncertain and unfamiliar. It would require leaving behind everything you have already put into the first path. It would require admitting that those years, or months, or weeks of investment did not lead to what you hoped. It would require starting over, which feels impossible. So you stand there, frozen, walking forward on the first path, even though you know it is not working, even though you know it is making you miserable, even though you know deep down that you should turn around and take the other path. And you stay on that first path not because it is the best choice, but because you have already walked so far on it that turning back feels like a waste. This is the sunk cost fallacy, the third bug in your thinking, and it may be the most costly of all. The sunk cost fallacy is a pattern where you continue investing in something: a relationship, a career, a business, a project, a hobby, a belief, primarily because you have already invested so much into it, not because it is actually serving you or leading anywhere good. Your brain tells you, I have already spent 10 years in this career. I cannot leave now. I have already invested $50,000 in this business. I cannot shut it down now. I have already given 15 years to this relationship. I cannot end it now. I have already spent 2 years on this degree. I cannot switch majors now. The logic feels sound, but it is fundamentally flawed. The money you have already spent is gone. The years you have already invested are gone. They are sunk. They cannot be recovered, no matter what you do going forward. And yet, we let those gone resources dictate our present and future decisions. Imagine a business owner who started a company 5 years ago with great hope and significant financial investment. The business has never been profitable. The market has shifted. The original idea, which seemed brilliant at the time, has proven to be flawed or poorly timed. An objective observer would say, shut this down, salvage what you can, move on to something that has better prospects. But the owner cannot do it. They have invested 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have told their family and friends that this business would succeed. They have built their identity around being an entrepreneur with this particular company. So they keep pouring money into it. They keep working 80-hour weeks trying to make it work. They keep hoping that the next quarter will be different, that the next marketing campaign will turn things around, that patience and persistence will eventually pay off. Meanwhile, they are losing money. Their health is deteriorating. Their family is suffering from neglect, and they are increasingly stressed and depressed. The rational choice, the choice that would serve them best, is to stop. But the sunk cost fallacy keeps them trapped. Consider a marriage that has become loveless or even harmful. A couple has been together for 20 years. They have children, shared finances, shared history, shared social identity. The relationship is not working. They do not make each other happy. They may even be hurting each other. One or both of them recognize this clearly. But they stay. Why? Because they have already invested 20 years. Because leaving means admitting that those 20 years led to something that is not working. Because leaving means upheaval and uncertainty and starting over. And that feels harder than staying in a situation that is not working. They may stay not because they love each other, but because they have already paid so much to be together that leaving feels like a waste. Their children may sense the unhappiness in the home. Their own potential for genuine connection and genuine happiness remains locked away because they are held captive by decisions made years ago. This is the tragedy of the sunk cost fallacy in relationships. It keeps people trapped not just with the wrong partners, but sometimes in situations that are emotionally or even physically harmful. In your career, this bug shows up constantly. You took a job 10 years ago that seemed promising. You have climbed the ladder somewhat. You have built some reputation and credentials in this field. But you have come to realize, or perhaps you have known for years, that this is not actually what you want to do. You do not enjoy it. You are not passionate about it. There are other things you would rather pursue. But leaving means starting over. It means potentially taking a pay cut. It means giving up the seniority and respect you have built. It means your family might judge you for throwing away 10 years of career building. So you stay. Year after year, you show up and do work that does not fulfill you. Work that does not use your real talents. Work that slowly drains your spirit. You justify it by saying, "I have already invested so much, I cannot leave now." But what you are really doing is sacrificing your remaining working years, your most productive, most energetic years, on the altar of the years you have already spent. This is not wisdom. This is not prudence. This is being trapped by the sunk cost fallacy. Think about the film Toy Story. Woody, the main character, cannot let go of his relationship with Andy even when Andy is growing up and moving on. Woody has been Andy's favorite toy for years. He has invested his entire existence in being important to Andy. When Andy grows older and gets new toys, when Andy's attention shifts away from Woody, Woody struggles terribly. He cannot accept that the relationship has changed, that he needs to let go, that his identity needs to evolve. This is the sunk cost fallacy playing out in a children's film. The desperate attempt to hold on to something because you have already invested so much in it, not because it is actually working anymore. Of course, by the end of the film, Woody learns to let go and finds new purpose. But the emotional journey of that release, that acceptance that what was once important may not serve you anymore, that is the struggle of sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy also appears in smaller, daily decisions that compound over time. You have been taking a class for 2 months that is boring and not teaching you what you hoped. You have paid for the class already, so you keep attending. You have been reading a book for weeks that you are not enjoying. You have come this far, so you finish it instead of putting it down and reading something you would actually love. You have been following a hobby for years that no longer brings you joy, but you keep doing it because you have invested so much time and money in equipment and lessons. You are eating a meal you do not enjoy because you have already paid for it. You are staying at a party you are not enjoying because you have already driven there, and it would feel wasteful to leave early. In each of these cases, the sunk cost, the time, money, or energy already spent, is influencing your present decision in ways that do not serve your actual well-being or happiness. The reason this bug is so powerful is that it feels like prudence. It feels like wisdom to not waste what you have already invested. It feels like weakness or impulsiveness to walk away from something you have already committed to. Our culture reinforces this thinking. We admire people who stick with things, who persist, who do not give up. And persistence is valuable. But there is a crucial difference between persistence in pursuing a goal that is actually worth pursuing and stubbornness in continuing down a path that is not working. Persistence says, "This goal matters to me, and even though it is difficult, I will keep going because the destination is worth it." The sunk cost fallacy says, "I have already walked so far that I cannot turn back, even though I am no longer sure the destination is worth it." The sunk cost fallacy creates a particular kind of suffering. The suffering of being trapped by your own past decisions, of living a life dictated by choices you made years ago when you were different, when you knew less, when circumstances were different. It is the suffering of being held hostage by who you used to be. instead of being free to become who you actually want to be. Think about what happens in a long-term relationship that has stopped working. Two people stay together, not because they love each other, but because they have already invested so much time together. They wake up each morning in a situation that does not nourish them. They come home to someone they no longer feel connected to. They navigate daily life alongside someone who has become, in many ways, a stranger. They watch their own potential for joy and connection shrivel because they are holding on to something that is not working. Their children, if they have them, grow up in an environment of quiet unhappiness or active conflict, modeling for those children that this is what relationships are supposed to be like. Meanwhile, both partners are suffering. Both could potentially find genuine connection and genuine happiness with someone else or alone, but they cannot access that possibility because they are trapped by the sunk cost fallacy. This is not just sadness. This is years of your finite life spent in a situation that is not serving anyone, least of all yourself. In your career, the sunk cost fallacy creates the particular suffering of being stuck. You spend 40 or 50 hours a week for decades doing work that does not fulfill you. You pass over opportunities that might actually bring you joy because those opportunities would require leaving what you have already invested in. You watch people younger than you make different choices, take risks, find work that matters to them, and you feel envious and resentful. But you feel trapped because of the years you have already spent. Your health deteriorates because you are stressed and unhappy. Your relationships suffer because you come home depleted and frustrated. Your sense of self diminishes because you spend your most energetic hours doing something that does not align with your values or your talents. This is not just career dissatisfaction. This is a slow erasure of your sense of possibility and potential. You have become a prisoner of your own past choices. The sunk cost fallacy also creates a particular kind of financial suffering. People stay in bad investments not because they believe the investment will succeed, but because they have already lost money and cannot face the reality of that loss. They keep putting good money after bad, hoping to recover what they have already lost. They go bankrupt not because they made one bad decision, but because they made a bad decision and then compounded the damage by being unable to accept that loss and move on. They sabotage their financial security and their family's future because they cannot accept that past money is gone. Perhaps most painfully, the sunk cost fallacy creates a suffering rooted in regret and resentment. You stay in a situation because of what you have already invested, and you resent everyone around you, your partner, your boss, your family, for trapping you there. You blame them for your unhappiness without recognizing that you are choosing to stay. You become bitter about the years you have spent on something that was not worth it. But instead of accepting that loss and moving forward, you keep investing more years, deepening the resentment. You pass that resentment on to your children, your partner, your colleagues. Everyone around you suffers because you are suffering, and you are suffering because you cannot let go of something that is not working. So what to do about it? The first step is to consciously separate past costs from present and future choices. This is harder than it sounds because your brain naturally weights past investments heavily. But try this. When you are facing a decision about whether to continue investing in something, a relationship, a job, a business, a project, make a deliberate effort to ignore what you have already spent. Ask yourself, if I had never invested in this before, if I was making this decision fresh today, would I choose to invest in this now? If the answer is no, then the sunk cost fallacy is influencing you. If the answer is yes, then you have a genuine reason to continue, and it is not based on the fallacy. The second step is to reframe letting go not as failure or waste, but as wisdom. When you walk away from something that is not working, you are not wasting what you have already invested. You are protecting what remains: your time, your health, your future, your potential for genuine happiness. The years you have already spent are gone regardless of whether you continue. But your remaining years are still yours to invest wisely. Letting go is not giving up. Letting go is choosing yourself. Letting go is choosing your future over your past. The third step is to practice acceptance of loss. This is perhaps the deepest work, and it is not easy. When you walk away from something you have invested in, there is real loss. You have to grieve that loss. You have to accept that the time and money and energy you invested did not lead where you hoped. You have to sit with the discomfort of that reality. Many people cannot do this, so they stay stuck rather than face the grief. But grief is temporary. Being stuck is permanent. If you can move through the grief, you can actually move on. If you cannot accept the loss, you will be enslaved by it forever. The fourth step is to make new choices based on your current values and current circumstances, not on past investments. Ask yourself, what do I actually want now? Not what I wanted 5 years ago, not what I committed to when I was different. But what do I actually want now? What would serve my well-being? What would align with my values? What would make me happy? Once you have answered those questions, you can make a choice that is actually yours, not a choice dictated by your past. The fifth step is to set a decision deadline. If you are in a situation that might be a sunk cost trap, a business that is not profitable, a relationship that is not working, a job that is not fulfilling, give yourself permission to assess it seriously on a specific timeline. Set a date. 3 months from now, I will evaluate whether this is still worth investing in. 6 months from now, I will make a final decision. This creates space for genuine evaluation instead of just drifting indefinitely. Here is your challenge for today. Identify one situation in your life where you might be trapped by the sunk cost fallacy. It could be a relationship, a career, a business, a project, a hobby, anything where you have invested significantly and you are not entirely happy with how it is going. Now ask yourself honestly, if I were making this decision fresh today, knowing what I know now, would I choose to be in this situation? Write down your honest answer. If the answer is yes, you can continue with confidence, knowing your choice is based on present reality, not past investment. If the answer is no, then you have important work to do. The work of accepting that loss and making a new choice. That work is hard, but it is far less hard than spending the rest of your life in a situation that is not serving you. The sunk cost fallacy is particularly dangerous because it masquerades as wisdom and responsibility. It tells you that leaving would be wasteful, irresponsible, weak. But the real wisdom is in recognizing that your remaining time is precious and finite, and that investing it in something that is not working is the greatest waste of all. The real responsibility is to yourself and to those who depend on you, to create a life that is as good as it can be with the time you have remaining. The real strength is in being able to let go, to accept loss, to make a new choice, to start over if necessary. As you move through this realization, you might feel afraid. You might feel guilty about the years you have already invested that will not lead where you hoped. You might feel uncertain about what comes next. That is all normal. That is all part of the process of breaking free from the sunk cost fallacy. And on the other side of that fear and guilt and uncertainty is the possibility of genuine freedom. the freedom to live a life based on your current values and current circumstances, not on decisions made years ago by a person who was different from who you are now. Now we come to the fourth bug, one that shapes your entire perception of reality without you even knowing it is happening. It is the pattern that keeps you seeing only what you want to see, believing only what you want to believe, and dismissing everything that contradicts your worldview. It is confirmation bias, and it works so subtly that you will likely not recognize it operating in your own thinking even after you understand exactly how it works. Chapter 4. Confirmation bias. You wake up in the morning and check your news feed. A story appears that confirms something you already believe about the world, perhaps about politics or economics or human nature or the state of society. You read it carefully. You might even share it with friends or family. It feels like important information, like truth you have discovered. Later that day, another story appears that contradicts your existing belief. You scroll past it quickly. You might think, that source is biased, or that story is misleading, or those are just outliers that do not represent the real situation. You do not read it carefully. You do not share it. In fact, you might not even fully register that you have dismissed it. This is confirmation bias, the fourth bug in your thinking. And it is so subtle, so universal, and so powerful that most people never fully recognize it operating in their own minds. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in ways that confirm your pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. In other words, your mind is not a neutral receiver of information. It is a filter. It actively searches for evidence that supports what you already think and dismisses or minimizes evidence that contradicts what you already think. And because this process happens automatically, largely outside your conscious awareness, you experience it as simply seeing the truth, not as filtering reality through your existing beliefs. You probably remember the experience of buying a new car or a new piece of technology. After you make the purchase, you suddenly start noticing that same model or brand everywhere. You see it on the street, in parking lots, in advertisements. It seems like the model has become suddenly popular, like everyone is buying it. But the reality is different. The model was always there. You are just noticing it now because it is relevant to you. Your brain has essentially said, "This thing is now important to you, so I am going to highlight every instance of it that I encounter." This is confirmation bias in its most benign form. Your brain helping you notice what is relevant to your current focus. But the same mechanism that helps you notice the car you just bought also helps you notice only the news stories that confirm your political beliefs, only the evidence that your partner is not listening to you, only the data that supports your theory about why you have not been promoted. In 1950, during the early years of the Cold War, Senator Joseph McCarthy began a campaign to expose supposed communist sympathizers in the United States government and throughout American society. What followed was one of the most striking examples of confirmation bias operating at a national scale. People were convinced, genuinely convinced, that communists had infiltrated American institutions and were working to undermine the nation. Once this belief took hold, confirmation bias did the rest. People saw evidence of communist activity everywhere. A person who had attended a lecture by a suspected communist 20 years earlier was suddenly dangerous. A person who had made a donation to what they thought was a legitimate charitable organization was suddenly suspect if that organization was later linked to left-wing causes. A person who had made a critical comment about American foreign policy was suddenly a potential traitor. The evidence seemed overwhelming, the dangers seemed real, and millions of Americans were convinced they were seeing truth. But what they were actually experiencing was confirmation bias on a massive scale. Their minds had locked onto the belief that communists were infiltrating America, and now they were seeing evidence of this threat everywhere they looked. Innocent people were accused, careers were destroyed, families were torn apart, all because people were seeing what they already believed they would see, and dismissing any evidence that contradicted this narrative. You probably remember the O.J. Simpson trial from 1995. A man was accused of murder. The trial was televised, and the entire nation watched as evidence was presented. But here is what is striking. People on opposite sides of the case looked at the exact same evidence and reached opposite conclusions. Those who believed Simpson was guilty saw the blood evidence as damning proof. Those who believed Simpson was innocent saw the same blood evidence as suspicious, possibly planted by a biased police force. Both sides were gathering evidence to support their existing beliefs. Both sides were interpreting ambiguous evidence through the lens of what they already thought. Both sides were convinced they were seeing the truth while the other side was deluded. This is confirmation bias in action. Two groups of intelligent people looking at the same information and seeing opposite realities because their brains are filtering that information through their existing beliefs. Now fast forward to today. You consume news and social media that aligns with your political beliefs. You follow people who think like you do. You see stories that confirm what you already think about the state of the world, about particular groups of people, about how society should work. Someone from the opposite political perspective is doing exactly the same thing from their side. They are consuming media that confirms their beliefs. They are following people who think like they do. They are seeing a completely different set of stories that confirm what they think about the world. You are both absolutely convinced you are seeing the truth. You are both utterly baffled by how the other side can be so blind, so foolish, so dishonest. But what is actually happening is that you are both trapped in confirmation bias. You are both filtering reality through your existing beliefs, both seeing evidence that supports what you already think, both dismissing evidence that contradicts what you already think. You live in different information universes, and neither of you is seeing reality clearly. You have probably seen the film The Big Lebowski, or at least you know the basic story. The main character, known as the Dude, gets caught up in a case of mistaken identity. He and his friend Walter become convinced that a kidnapping plot is underway, that there is a dangerous conspiracy happening around them. From that moment forward, they see evidence of this conspiracy everywhere. Every strange occurrence, every odd phone call, every unusual interaction is interpreted as confirmation of the conspiracy they believe is happening. They are not making things up. Things are actually happening around them. But they are interpreting those events through the lens of their existing belief about the conspiracy. They are seeing what they expect to see. They are gathering evidence to support what they already believe. And this confirmation bias leads them down a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre and destructive actions based on a narrative that may or may not actually be true. The film is funny, but it is also a perfect illustration of how confirmation bias can take intelligent people and lead them to see patterns and conspiracies that may not actually exist, simply because they have locked onto a belief and are now gathering all available evidence to support it. Now imagine this happening in your own work life. You are working at a company, and you have a colleague, let's call him Marcus, who you have decided is not competent. Perhaps he made a mistake early on, or perhaps you simply had a personality clash, or perhaps he was hired for a position you wanted. Whatever the reason, you have formed a belief. Marcus is not good at his job. From that moment forward, everything Marcus does is filtered through this belief. Marcus makes a mistake on a project, and you think, see, I knew he was not competent. This is further evidence. Marcus comes up with an idea in a meeting, and you think, that is not going to work. This is typical of his poor thinking. Marcus stays late to finish a project, and you think, he is probably just trying to make himself look good because he knows he is not performing. Meanwhile, your manager mentions that Marcus did good work on something, and you think, the manager is just being nice, or Marcus got lucky, or someone else actually did the work. You are not consciously lying to yourself. You are not intentionally dismissing evidence. Your brain is simply doing what brains do. It is filtering information through your existing beliefs. You have decided Marcus is incompetent, and now you are gathering evidence to support that belief while dismissing evidence that contradicts it. But here is where it gets really interesting. Because you see Marcus as incompetent, you probably treat him differently than you treat colleagues you respect. You are less warm with him. You are less likely to include him in informal conversations or social gatherings. You are less likely to help him or mentor him. You might even actively work to undermine him or exclude him from opportunities. And because you are treating him differently, Marcus responds differently. He becomes defensive. He becomes less engaged. He stops trying as hard. His performance actually declines because of how you are treating him based on your confirmation bias. Your negative belief about Marcus has become somewhat self-fulfilling. You see his declining performance as further evidence that your original belief was correct. See, I knew he was not competent. When in fact you have contributed to creating the very situation you believed existed all along. In relationships, confirmation bias creates a particular kind of trap. You form an opinion about your partner. Perhaps you decide they are selfish, or that they do not really love you, or that they are not listening to you. From that moment forward, your brain acts like a detective searching for evidence to confirm this belief. Your partner does something kind, and you interpret it through the lens of your existing belief. They are only doing this because they feel guilty, or because they want something from you. Your partner does something neutral, and you interpret it as further confirmation of your negative belief. Your partner does something that should directly contradict your belief, and you minimize it or explain it away. You have essentially locked yourself into a narrative about your partner and your relationship, and you are no longer seeing your partner as they actually are. You are seeing your partner as filtered through the lens of confirmation bias. Do you remember the experience of getting caught in an argument with someone you care about? Perhaps you said something that hurt them, and they tried to explain why they were hurt. But instead of listening, your brain was already gathering evidence to support your position that you were right or that they were being too sensitive. You remembered all the times they had been oversensitive before. You remembered times when you had said similar things and they had not been bothered. You were not actually listening to them. You were gathering ammunition for your own defense. This is confirmation bias, creating a barrier to genuine connection and genuine understanding. In your professional life, confirmation bias shows up constantly in ways that damage your career and your workplace relationships. You form an opinion about a colleague. Perhaps you decide they are not competent, or that they are lazy, or that they are trying to undermine you. From that moment forward, everything they do is filtered through that belief. They make a mistake and you think, see, I knew they were not competent. They work late on a project and you think, they are just trying to make themselves look good. They disagree with your idea and you think, they are trying to undermine me. Meanwhile, your colleague might be completely unaware that you have formed this negative opinion. They might be working hard and doing decent work. But because of your confirmation bias, you see only their failures and their missteps. And because you see them negatively, you probably treat them differently. Less warmly, less generously, less openly. And because you treat them differently, they respond differently. And your negative belief becomes somewhat self-fulfilling. The particular danger of confirmation bias is that it creates the illusion of certainty. You are not just believing something. You are seeing evidence for it everywhere. You feel like you have examined the evidence carefully and reached a logical conclusion. You do not feel like you are filtering reality. You feel like you are perceiving truth. This is what makes confirmation bias so insidious. It does not feel like bias. It feels like objectivity. Confirmation bias creates a particular kind of suffering. The suffering of being trapped in your own worldview, isolated from reality as it actually is. Unable to grow or adapt because you have locked yourself into a narrative that you continue to confirm to yourself day after day. In relationships, confirmation bias creates the suffering of distance and disconnection. You have decided your partner does not love you, so you interpret their actions through that lens. You miss their genuine efforts to show you love because they do not fit your pre-existing narrative. You accumulate evidence, real or imagined, that confirms your belief. You share this evidence with friends, and they sympathize and agree with you, further reinforcing your belief. Meanwhile, your partner is confused and hurt because they feel genuinely misunderstood. They are trying to show you love in the ways they know how. But you have already decided that their love is not real. So their efforts bounce off your armor of confirmation bias. Years can pass like this. Two people in the same relationship, living in two completely different narratives about what the relationship is, each one convinced they are seeing the truth. The suffering is real. The distance is real. But it is created not by the actual state of the relationship, but by confirmation bias, filtering your perception of it. In your career, confirmation bias can trap you in a narrative about your own limitations or about specific colleagues. You might have decided early in your career that you are not a public speaker, not a leader, not creative, not good with numbers. From that moment forward, you notice evidence that confirms this belief. You stumble over words during a presentation and you think, "See, I knew I was not a public speaker." You have an idea that is not immediately embraced, and you think, "See, I am not creative." Someone corrects your math, and you think, "See, I am not good with numbers." You do not notice the presentations where you actually did well, the ideas that were accepted, the calculations that were correct. Your confirmation bias has locked you into a narrative about who you are, and you are gathering evidence to support that narrative every day. This narrative becomes a prison. You do not pursue opportunities because they do not fit the story you have told yourself about who you are. Your career stagnates not because you actually lack ability, but because you have locked yourself into a limiting narrative through confirmation bias. Or perhaps you have formed a belief about a colleague or a boss, that they are out to get you, that they are sabotaging you, that they do not respect you. You start seeing evidence everywhere. They do not include you in a meeting, and you think, "They are trying to marginalize me." They give feedback on your work, and you think, "They are being overly critical because they do not want me to succeed." They praise someone else's work, and you think, "They are just playing favorites," or "They are trying to make me look bad by comparison." You begin to withdraw, to become defensive, to distrust their motives. You stop collaborating openly. You stop asking for help. You start protecting yourself. And because you are behaving differently, more defensively, more withdrawn, the dynamic between you and this person actually changes. They notice your defensiveness and withdraw themselves. What started as confirmation bias in your head has now become an actual rift in the relationship. You are both suffering, and the rift is at least partially created by your confirmation bias. Confirmation bias also creates suffering through what researchers call filter bubbles or echo chambers. You consume media that confirms your existing beliefs. You follow people on social media who think like you do. You spend time with friends who share your worldview. You gradually lose exposure to perspectives different from your own. Your worldview becomes more extreme, more isolated, more disconnected from how other people actually see things. You become increasingly frustrated with people who do not share your beliefs. You cannot understand how they can be so blind, so foolish, so dishonest. But what is actually happening is that you have trapped yourself in a confirmation bias bubble, where you only see evidence that confirms what you already think. People on the other side of the political or social divide have done exactly the same thing from their perspective. Neither of you is seeing reality clearly. Both of you are suffering from the illusion of certainty created by confirmation bias. Perhaps most painfully, confirmation bias prevents you from learning and growing. Real growth requires encountering perspectives that challenge your existing beliefs, information that contradicts what you think you know, feedback that reveals blindness you did not know you had. But confirmation bias makes you resistant to all of this. When someone challenges your belief, you do not listen openly. You look for flaws in their argument. When information contradicts what you think, you dismiss the source as biased. When someone gives you feedback that contradicts your self-image, you explain why they are wrong about you. You have essentially locked the door to growth. You cannot evolve because you are constantly gathering evidence to support who you already are, not evidence to help you become who you could become. What to do about it? The first step is to actively, deliberately seek out information that contradicts your existing beliefs. This is uncomfortable. Your brain will resist. Your brain wants to seek out confirming information because it feels good. It feels like you are right. But deliberately exposing yourself to opposing viewpoints, to information that challenges what you think, is how you break the confirmation bias cycle. If you hold political beliefs, deliberately consume news from sources that represent the opposite perspective. Not to be convinced to change your mind necessarily, but to genuinely understand how intelligent, reasonable people can see the world differently than you do. If you have beliefs about a particular group of people, deliberately seek out media created by people from that group. If you have opinions about your partner or your colleague, deliberately look for evidence of their positive qualities, evidence that contradicts your existing narrative. The second step is to practice what researchers call perspective taking. This means genuinely trying to understand how the world looks from someone else's vantage point. Not to agree with them, but to understand them. Ask yourself, if I believed what they believe, what evidence would I see? What experiences would have led me to this conclusion? What values or priorities might be different from mine that would make this perspective make sense? This practice is not about deciding they are right and you are wrong. It is about recognizing that confirmation bias is operating in both of you, and that genuine understanding requires stepping outside your own filter. The third step is to ask yourself critical questions about your own beliefs. When you hold a strong belief about something, about a person, about a group, about how the world works, ask yourself, what evidence would disprove this belief? If you cannot think of any evidence that would change your mind, then you are probably trapped in confirmation bias. A belief that cannot be questioned, that is immune to evidence, is not really a belief. It is a conviction born of confirmation bias. Real beliefs are held lightly enough that they can change in the face of new evidence. The fourth step is to actively seek out people who disagree with you and have genuine conversations with them. not arguments, but actual conversations where you are trying to understand how they see the world. You will find that most people who disagree with you are not stupid or dishonest. They simply have different experiences, different values, or different access to information than you do. When you genuinely understand how they see the world, confirmation bias loses some of its power over you. You start to see that reality is more complex than your existing narrative suggested. The fifth step is to build a practice of intellectual humility into your daily life. Before you share a strong opinion, pause and ask yourself, am I seeing this clearly, or am I filtering it through my existing beliefs? Before you dismiss someone's perspective, ask yourself, could I be wrong about this? Before you gather evidence to support your position in an argument, ask yourself, what evidence am I not seeing because of my confirmation bias? This practice of pausing and questioning your own thinking is how you slowly break free from the confirmation bias trap. Here is your challenge for today. Identify one area where you hold a strong belief about politics, about a type of person, about a situation in your life, about how the world works, about a colleague or family member. Now genuinely ask yourself, what information am I filtering out because it does not fit this belief? What perspective might someone have that would make them see this differently than I do? Seek out that perspective. Read an article, watch a video, have a conversation with someone who sees this differently. Do not do this to be convinced to change your mind. Do this to recognize that confirmation bias is operating, that reality is more complex than your existing narrative, and that genuine wisdom requires openness to evidence that contradicts what you already think. Confirmation bias is perhaps the most universal of all the bugs we have explored so far. Everyone has it. It operates in everyone's thinking all the time. The difference between people is not whether they have confirmation bias, they do, but whether they recognize it operating and work to counteract it. The moment you recognize that your mind is filtering reality through your existing beliefs, you have taken the first step toward genuine clarity and genuine wisdom. But there is one more bug, perhaps the most personally costly of all. It is the pattern that keeps you frozen in place even when you know change is necessary. The pattern that makes you cling to the familiar even when the familiar is making you miserable. It is the status quo bias, and it is waiting for you in the final chapter. Chapter 5. The status quo bias. You are living your life, and most of it is fine. Not perfect, but fine. Your job pays reasonably well, though it does not excite you. Your relationship is comfortable, though the spark has dimmed. Your living situation works, though you have often thought about moving. Your daily routines are established, predictable, safe. And then one day, you have a moment of clarity. You realize that you have been thinking about making changes for years, and you have done nothing. You have thought about changing careers, about moving to a different city, about ending a relationship that is no longer serving you, about starting a hobby you have always wanted to explore. You have thought about all of these things, and yet you have not done any of them. You are frozen in place. And the strange part is that you cannot entirely explain why. It is not that you lack the ability to change. It is not that you have tried and failed. It is that something keeps pulling you back toward the way things are, toward the familiar, toward the status quo. This is the fifth and final bug in your thinking, the status quo bias, and it may be the most imprisoning of all. The status quo bias is the tendency to prefer that things remain the same, to prefer the current state of affairs even when change would objectively be better. It is not laziness, though it can feel like laziness. It is not lack of ambition, though it can look like lack of ambition. Rather, it is a deep psychological pull toward the familiar, the known, the established. Your brain prefers the devil it knows to the devil it does not know. Your brain perceives change as loss, even when that change would bring genuine gain. Your brain treats the status quo as a kind of default, a kind of neutral position, when in fact the status quo is just as much a choice as any other choice. It is simply a choice you make by not choosing. Consider what happened in the United States with auto insurance in the 1990s. In New Jersey, the state set up the insurance system with a cheap basic coverage as the default option. When people signed up for insurance, they automatically got the cheap plan. They could choose to upgrade to more comprehensive coverage if they wanted, but they had to actively do something to make that choice. In neighboring Pennsylvania, the state set up the exact same insurance system, but with one crucial difference. Comprehensive coverage was the default option. When people signed up for insurance in Pennsylvania, they automatically got the more comprehensive plan. They could choose to downgrade to cheap coverage if they wanted, but they had to actively do something to make that choice. Here is what researchers found. In New Jersey, where the cheap plan was default, only 20% of drivers upgraded to comprehensive coverage. In Pennsylvania, where comprehensive coverage was default, only 25% of drivers downgraded to cheap coverage. In other words, people stayed with whatever was presented to them as the default option. They had the exact same choice available, the exact same insurance options at the exact same prices. But they made opposite decisions based purely on which option was labeled as the default. This is status quo bias operating at a massive scale, influencing millions of people's financial decisions. Most people probably believed they were making a rational choice based on their actual preferences, but their choice was actually shaped by a cognitive bias they were not even aware of. You can see the same pattern in your own life if you look closely. When you started your job, the company likely enrolled you in a certain retirement savings plan with certain default settings. Most people never change these settings, even if they would prefer different options. The default is set, and people stay with it. When you got health insurance, you probably accepted the default plan rather than studying all the alternatives. When you adopted certain morning routines or evening routines, they became the default for your day. And now they feel natural and comfortable, even if they no longer serve you well. Status quo bias creates a kind of gravitational pull toward the way things are. In your career, status quo bias operates as a powerful force, keeping you in your current job, your current position, your current salary, even when you know you would be happier or more fulfilled somewhere else. Imagine a person, let's call her Sarah, who took a job in accounting when she was 25 years old. At the time, it seemed like a good opportunity. The salary was decent. The company was stable. She had student loans to pay off and bills to cover. So she took the job. Now, 30 years later, Sarah is 55 years old. She has spent 3 decades in accounting. She has climbed the ladder somewhat. She has built relationships with colleagues. She has a comfortable salary and good benefits. But she has never loved accounting. It does not excite her. It does not align with her actual values or talents. She has always wanted to work with people, to help them directly, to do something more meaningful. She has thought about changing careers dozens of times. She has researched what it would take to train as a therapist or a career counselor or a teacher. She has looked into programs. She has talked to friends about it. But she has never taken action. Why? Because status quo bias is holding her in place. She has already invested 30 years in accounting. She has already built a reputation. She already knows how to do this job well. The thought of starting over at 55, going back to school, competing with younger people, starting at a lower salary, feels overwhelming. The unknown feels scarier than the familiar, even though the familiar makes her unhappy. And so Sarah stays in accounting, sacrificing her remaining working years to status quo bias, to the pull of the familiar, to the fear of the unknown. You have probably seen the film The Matrix. The story follows a man named Thomas Anderson, known as Neo, who discovers that his entire reality is an illusion, a sophisticated computer simulation called the Matrix. The real world is harsh, difficult, and dangerous. The Matrix is comfortable, familiar, and safe. Most people choose to remain in the Matrix, blissfully unaware that they are trapped in an illusion. But there is one character, Cypher, who is different. Cypher knows the truth. He has been freed from the Matrix and has seen the real world. But he cannot accept what he has learned. The real world is too hard. The Matrix, even though it is a lie, is more comfortable. So Cypher makes a deal. He will betray everyone and return to the Matrix in exchange for a comfortable life in the illusion. He chooses the familiar comfort of the lie over the hard truth of reality. This is status quo bias in its most extreme form. Choosing the familiar, the comfortable, even the false, over the uncertain, the difficult, the real. Cypher knows change is possible. He knows the Matrix is not real, but he cannot overcome the pull of the familiar, the comfort of what he already knows. Do you remember the film Groundhog Day? The main character, Phil, wakes up one morning and discovers that he is living the same day over and over again. No matter what happens, no matter what he does, he falls asleep and wakes up at the beginning of the same day. At first, he tries to break out of this cycle by doing crazy, reckless things, but he discovers he cannot escape it. He is literally stuck. The film is a fantasy, a magical premise. But embedded in that fantasy is a profound truth. The character realizes, gradually, that even before being physically trapped in one day, he was already stuck in a kind of status quo. He was living the same patterns over and over, making the same choices, having the same shallow interactions, moving through life mechanically without genuine growth or connection. He was so caught in the familiar routines of his life that he was not really living at all. Only when he is forced to stay in the same day does he begin to change, to grow, to actually live. The magic in the film is not that he escapes the repeating day. It is that he finally recognizes and breaks free from the status quo bias that was holding him prisoner even before that physical repetition began. A person might spend 20 years in a career they chose at age 22, before they fully understood what they were choosing. They might have outgrown that career. They might have developed new interests, new talents, new values. But they stay because the career is familiar, because they have already invested years in it, because the thought of starting over feels overwhelming. They stay not because the job is great, but because the alternative, the unknown, the uncertainty, the risk of change feels worse. And so they sacrifice their remaining working years to the status quo bias, the pull toward the familiar, the fear of the unknown. In your relationships, status quo bias can keep you in situations that are no longer serving you. You might have been in a relationship for 10 or 15 or 20 years. The relationship has become a habit. The spark has gone. You no longer feel genuinely connected to your partner. But you stay because leaving feels too disruptive, too uncertain, too scary. You have built a life together. You have shared history. The thought of untangling all of that, of starting over, of being alone, feels overwhelming. So you stay in a relationship that is no longer alive, trapped by status quo bias. Your partner might be feeling exactly the same way. Both of you might be suffering. Both of you might recognize that the relationship is not working. And yet both of you stay because the status quo, however unsatisfying, feels safer than the alternative. In your living situation, status quo bias might keep you in a neighborhood you no longer like, in a house that no longer suits you, in a city that no longer serves you. You might have moved there for a reason that no longer applies, a job, a relationship, a life circumstance that has changed. But the move felt like a big undertaking years ago, and now it feels even bigger. Your life is established here. You have friendships, routines, a sense of place. The thought of leaving all of that behind to start over somewhere new feels overwhelming. So you stay, trapped by status quo bias, in a place that is no longer where you want to be. You pass the real estate listing sometimes and think, I could move. I could start over. But the status quo pulls you back. The familiar, even when it is no longer satisfying, feels safer than the unknown. You have probably noticed something about these examples. Status quo bias often combines with sunk cost fallacy. You have already invested so much in your current job, your current relationship, your current living situation. Leaving would mean that investment was wasted. So you stay not just because the status quo is familiar, but because you have already paid such a high price to be in it, that leaving feels like admitting defeat, admitting that all those years were wasted. The two bugs work together, creating a double trap that holds you in place. Status quo bias creates a particular kind of suffering. The suffering of unrealized potential, of roads not taken, of dreams deferred indefinitely. It is the suffering of looking back at your life and realizing that you spent decades in situations that were not actually working for you. Situations you could have changed, but did not. In your career, status quo bias creates the suffering of being stuck. You spend 40 or 50 hours a week doing work that does not fulfill you, work that does not align with your values or your talents. You pass over opportunities that might actually bring you joy, because those opportunities would require leaving what you have already established. You watch people around you make changes, start new careers, move to new cities, pursue new passions, and you feel a mix of envy and regret. You tell yourself you are too old to change, that it is too late, that you are locked in place. But you are not locked in place because of your age or your circumstances. You are locked in place because of status quo bias. You are frozen by the fear of the unknown, by the pull of the familiar, by the sense that change is loss, even when staying is also loss. Sarah, the accountant we discussed earlier, will likely retire from accounting without ever having tried the career path she actually wanted. She will have spent 40 years doing work that made her unhappy when she could have spent 20 years doing work that brought her joy. She will have chosen comfort over meaning, familiarity over fulfillment. In your relationships, status quo bias creates the suffering of distance masquerading as intimacy. You and your partner have become roommates, co-managers of a household, but not lovers, not true partners, not people who genuinely see and know each other. You might still love each other, but the relationship has become comfortable in the way a worn-out chair is comfortable. You fit into the shape of it, but it no longer supports you well. The suffering is quiet. It is not dramatic, but it is persistent. Year after year, you wake up next to someone you no longer feel connected to. Year after year, you wonder what it would be like to be with someone you actually desired. But you do not explore that wondering because it feels too disruptive. If you have children, status quo bias might keep you in this situation even longer because you tell yourself you are staying for the kids. But your children are growing up in a home without genuine connection between their parents. They are learning, through your example, that this is what relationships are supposed to be like. Comfortable, safe, but ultimately disconnected. Perhaps worst of all, status quo bias prevents you from becoming who you could become. Real growth requires change. Real growth requires stepping into the unknown. Real growth requires being willing to leave behind what is familiar in order to explore what could be. But status quo bias pulls you back toward the familiar every time you try to move forward. You think about changing careers, and status quo bias whispers, "But you have already invested so much in this career, why throw it away?" You think about ending a relationship that is no longer working, and status quo bias whispers, "But you have built so much together, why destroy it?" You think about moving to a new city, pursuing a new hobby, trying something new, and status quo bias whispers, "But things are fine as they are. Why risk disrupting them?" And so you stay frozen, and year after year passes, and you never become who you could have become. You reach the end of your life, and you realize you spent it in the comfort of the familiar rather than in the pursuit of the meaningful. What to do about it? The first step is to recognize that the status quo is not neutral. The status quo is not the default, the safe choice. The status quo is a choice, just like any other choice, and it has consequences just like any other choice. When you stay in a job that does not fulfill you, that has consequences for your health, your happiness, your potential. When you stay in a relationship that is not working, that has consequences. When you stay in a city you no longer love, that has consequences. The status quo is not free. The status quo costs you something. It costs you time. It costs you potential. It costs you the life you could be living. The second step is to consciously evaluate your current situation as if you were choosing it for the first time today. Ask yourself, if I were making this choice fresh today, knowing what I know now, would I choose this job? Would I choose this relationship? Would I choose to live in this place? Would I choose to maintain these routines? If the answer is no, then status quo bias is keeping you in something that is not actually serving you. If the answer is yes, then you can commit to it, knowing that your choice is based on present reality, not on past investment or the pull of the familiar. The third step is to set a decision deadline. If you are in a situation that might be influenced by status quo bias, a job that is not fulfilling, a relationship that is not working, a living situation that no longer serves you, give yourself permission to make a decision on a specific timeline. Set a date. 3 months from now, I will have made a decision about whether to stay or leave. 6 months from now, I will have taken action. This creates urgency and prevents you from drifting indefinitely. Status quo bias thrives on indefiniteness. It thrives on, "I will think about this later." A clear deadline cuts through that. The fourth step is to practice small changes in low-stakes situations. Do not try to change everything at once. Instead, change your morning routine. Change where you eat lunch. Change your evening rituals. Take a different route to work. Try a new hobby. Join a new group. Make small changes deliberately. And notice how your brain resists them. How it pulls you back toward the familiar. This practice helps you recognize how status quo bias operates in your thinking. It also helps you get comfortable with change in small doses, so the bigger changes feel less overwhelming. The fifth step is to actively seek out people who have made the changes you are considering and listen to their stories. If you are thinking about changing careers, find someone who has made that change and ask them about it. If you are thinking about ending a relationship, find someone who has done that and ask them how they processed it, what they learned, how their life changed. If you are thinking about moving to a new city, find someone who has done that. Ask them, was the change as scary as you thought it would be? Do you regret it? What do you wish you had known beforehand? These conversations can help dissolve the fear that status quo bias creates around change. You will probably discover that the unknown is less scary than your brain makes it out to be, and that people who have made changes they were afraid of usually do not regret them. Here is your challenge for today. Identify one area of your life where status quo bias might be holding you in place. Your job, your relationship, your living situation, your daily routines, your hobbies, your social circles, anything where you have been thinking about making a change but have not taken action. Now ask yourself honestly, if I were choosing this situation fresh today, would I choose it? Write down your answer. If the answer is no, then you have important work ahead. The work of understanding what is keeping you stuck and making a conscious choice to change rather than drifting indefinitely in a situation that is not serving you. If the answer is yes, then you can commit to your current situation knowing that your commitment is based on genuine choice, not on status quo bias. Status quo bias is particularly dangerous because it masquerades as wisdom, as caution, as responsibility. It tells you that staying is the safe choice, that change is risky, that you should not rock the boat. But the real risk is in staying stuck, in sacrificing your remaining years to a situation that is no longer working, in never becoming who you could become. The real wisdom is in recognizing when the status quo is no longer serving you and having the courage to choose something different. You have now encountered all 5 bugs in your thinking. The bias blind spot that makes you unable to see your own faults, the Dunning-Kruger Effect that makes you unable to see your own limitations, the sunk cost fallacy that keeps you holding on to the wrong things, confirmation bias that keeps you seeing only what fits your existing beliefs, and status quo bias that keeps you frozen in place. These 5 bugs are not rare, strange afflictions. They are universal. They are operating in your thinking right now, every day. The difference between people who grow and people who stagnate is not that some people have these bugs and others do not. Everyone has them. The difference is that some people recognize these bugs operating and work to counteract them, while others remain trapped, unaware that their thinking is being shaped by these invisible forces. You have the knowledge now. You understand how these bugs work. You understand why they make you miserable. You understand what to do about them. The only question that remains is, will you actually do it? Will you pause before reacting and ask yourself, am I trapped by bias blind spot? Will you seek out evidence that contradicts what you already believe? Will you recognize when you are overconfident about your own knowledge? Will you accept losses and move on from situations that are not working? Will you have the courage to change when the status quo is no longer serving you? Conclusion. You have reached the end of this book, yet this moment is much closer to a beginning than a conclusion. Everything you have learned about thinking errors has meaning only when it becomes part of your daily decisions, the way you respond to challenges, and the way you interpret the situations that shape your life. Knowledge gains value not when you remember it, but when you apply it. Throughout this journey, you have explored 5 patterns of thought that quietly influence the way people make choices. You now understand how the bias blind spot works and why it makes it easier to notice other people's mistakes than your own. You also recognize the Dunning-Kruger Effect and how it can inflate confidence at the early stages of learning, making humility an essential part of genuine progress. You have seen the impact of the sunk cost fallacy and how past investments can hold you in place long after a situation has stopped moving you forward. You understand how confirmation bias shapes the information you pay attention to and how easily it reinforces beliefs you already hold. And you have learned how the status quo bias encourages you to stick with familiar routines even when those routines no longer support the life you want to build. These patterns will not disappear. They are part of the way every mind works, and they will appear again in future decisions, interactions, and transitions. What has changed is your ability to notice them. When you pause long enough to recognize that one of these habits might be influencing your thinking, you create space for a more intentional response. That pause is not dramatic or symbolic. It is a practical moment of awareness that gives you room to choose differently. Real change rarely happens overnight. It grows out of small decisions made repeatedly, especially in situations where old habits once dictated your behavior. A single honest reflection can shift the direction of an entire conversation. A willingness to hear a perspective that challenges your own can open the door to insights you did not expect. Admitting that you do not know something can lead you to the guidance you actually need. Accepting a loss you have resisted can free the energy that has been tied to something that no longer supports your goals. You do not need to overhaul your life all at once. A modest step taken today carries more power than a dramatic plan postponed indefinitely. You might pause before reacting in a familiar way, or allow yourself to reconsider an assumption you have held for a long time. You might reach out to someone whose viewpoint differs from yours and listen with curiosity instead of defensiveness. You might take one practical step toward a change you have delayed, simply to see what becomes possible when you move, instead of waiting for the perfect moment. What you choose from this point forward can be guided by clarity rather than habit. You deserve choices rooted in awareness rather than automatic patterns. You deserve relationships shaped by honest communication rather than old narratives. You deserve the freedom to adjust your direction when the one you have been following no longer reflects your values or your needs. Growth does not require flawless decisions. It requires attention to what guides those decisions and the willingness to respond with intention rather than reflex. These 5 thinking errors will continue to surface, yet they no longer define the limits of your thinking. Each time you notice one, its influence weakens. Each time you choose clarity over familiarity, you strengthen a different mental pathway, one that supports a wiser, steadier, more grounded way of moving through the world. Progress often begins quietly, but it continues with every mindful choice you make. This chapter closes the explanation, but it does not close your development. The tools are now part of your perspective, and they are available whenever you need them.